Hello and welcome to Data Planet. I'm Emma Davis, and today's guest is Mike Barton, Vice President of Corporate Communication and Content Marketing at AudioEye. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Hey, happy to be here.
So, before we can get into talking about AudioEye, I think a little background on digital accessibility would be helpful. So, can you give a little overview of what digital accessibility means?
Yeah, at its most simple level, digital accessibility essentially means that anybody, regardless of their ability, their or disability, is able to access the same online content and achieve the same objectives. So you think about all the things that you did yesterday online, right? Working, connecting with friends and family, checking maybe the news, your finances, all these things that keep a person connected in our digital world. We kind of take for granted if we are sighted or don't have any visual or motor disabilities. But the reality is, a person could be blind, and so they're using a screen reader that goes and reads the code of the page and tells them what's on the site. And if it's not built accessibly, they run into barriers and issues that keep them from doing that. And some people can't use a mouse, right, because of dexterity issues. And so they only use a keyboard. And so they're tabbing. And so sometimes tabbing around a page or a site and using enter also creates issues. So yeah, really, it's just ensuring that from developing web content, designing it, all of it is made as accessible as possible so that no matter what technology you're using in the digital world, you're able to access the site, much like a physical store needs to be accessible so that somebody with a wheelchair or any other disability can also come in and buy clothes, as an example.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for the overview, and I'll have more follow-up questions about that once we are talking a bit more
Yeah.
about AudioEye. But let's now switch gears to AudioEye. So, what is it that you guys do?
So we have a blend of automation and technology and working with experts and people with disabilities to essentially, through that automation and through the expertise, audit sites and help companies find out where there are issues on their site, how we, through automation, can take care of those almost instantaneously with automation and then supplement that again. Automation can't do everything well,
Mhm.
as we know in so many other contexts. So we have automation point at the things we know it can do. And then for the remaining issues that exist on a customer site, we work with them to get those code fixes that are recommended by experts, again, people who have disabilities and who are using those assistive technologies so that they can kind of retrofit those sites so that they are more accessible. That means that they've got, and we can talk about this more, but it means they've got less legal risk because they're not going to get sued, or they're less likely to get sued as violating the ADA or other global regulations associated with web accessibility. But also, it makes your site more usable, more friendly for SEO and AEO and GEO. It kind of rises the tide, so to speak, of all your efforts. So, it really has an impact on loyalty and can have an impact on conversion and revenue as well. So it's not just it's the right thing to do. Companies who often uh, kind of are new to digital accessibility and the idea of it and begin to implement those practices, begin to see, oh, this is much more than just a kind of a moral
Yeah.
obligation. We're actually doing something that is something we should do, but also we're seeing, wow, surprise, we're seeing business impact and a growth from it as well.
Yeah. So you said a couple things that I want to touch on a little bit more. So one is ADA regulations for digital experiences. So, I'm very familiar with, oh, this building needs to have a ramp in it
Right.
and all that. Um, there are regulations for your website to need to be accessible.
Yeah, so that's the interesting thing. The ADA was written over 35 years ago. So at that point, the internet was like barely an idea, right? So the ADA itself is all about physical locations.
Right. And just
Fast
real quick,
forward,
ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act.
yes,
Yes.
thank
Okay.
you, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, and so that and the purpose of that was exactly what you said, which is when a store is being built, making sure that, counters are a certain height, that there's enough space for wheelchairs, that there's entrances and ramps, that there's parking spots available, and things like that.
Hmm.
So they put, yes, guidance in place so that companies could then build their spaces. Again, it's not like super directional, but it gives you the principles so that you can build an accessible physical space. Well, fast forward 10, 15 years, the internet becomes more of a thing, right? Our world shifts exponentially more digital, and some people with disabilities start to file lawsuits. And I'll do this very quickly, but essentially, we get to today where courts and other laws have since been enacted to build on top of it that say, hey, the digital world has to abide by those same principles as the physical world. So whether or not a person is physically going into your commerce store or digitally going to your e-commerce store, they need to be able to search. They need to be able to browse the products. We need to be able to, again, through that screen reader, see the product, right? They need to be able to have it explained to them so that they can visualize it. And then they ultimately need to be able to make a purchase. And so um, that is the legal part of it. And that's just in the US. California has a very strict law around accessibility, where if you are a business in, we'll pick Delaware, but you have a customer buying in California or trying to buy in California or trying to use your site and they can't, you can get sued in Delaware because your customer in California isn't able to use it. And more states are adopting that as well as kind of protections for their constituents. And last year, the EAA, the European Accessibility Act, went into place. So same type of principle. If you're a U.S. company and you sell to a customer in the European Union, your site needs to be accessible, and they also have fines and regulations associated with that. So it's becoming more and more kind of codified into law. So companies are starting to see, hey, not only can I get ahead of this as like a competitive differentiator for my business, right? Brand reputation as well. But I'm just getting ahead of these regulations that more and more are kind of making this something that I'm going to have to do in the future anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's we covered the sort of scary aspect, the like
Yeah.
if you don't do this, and all that. But um you also said something about there being net positive impacts to your business. This not just being about a moral thing or trying to avoid lawsuits, but there being actual incremental, improvements to revenue perhaps or customer retention. And so um how big a deal is accessibility? Like what is it? Oh, once in a while you might have a customer and you want to make sure that you can serve that customer and all that. Like percentage wise, how much of an impact could accessibility issues be having on a, an online business's revenue?
So I'll share a story and a few data points that I think kind of illustrate that well. So when I first came to AudioEye about 3 years ago, I had never heard of digital accessibility or never even thought about it. And I had been at large enterprise companies, kind of smaller growth companies in content, web strategy, right? Building landing pages, email, social, like all these things to try to go out and create really compelling experiences. And not once, which is like such a sad thing to look back and say, but not once I think could a person with a screen reader use this, or somebody who, again, has a mobility issue. And so when I was kind of illuminated to this whole topic, coming to AudioEye, I was like, oh, this is like, I got to get out there and talk to the people like me, right, who didn't know. And so I was talking to somebody when I first started who owned a business, had a website, right? And he's like, oh, that's so interesting. He's like, doesn't apply to me, but that's so interesting that you're doing that. I'm like, what do you mean it doesn't apply to you? He's, well, we sell, supplements and things for people who work out in the gym. So like people with disabilities, like I don't have blind people come to my site. And that to me kind of was interesting. And I heard that more and more. Insert industry, insert audience. There was just this immediate perception that that's not my audience. So I don't need to build towards it, which is, I think, the more you quickly you think about it, you're like, that logic breaks down almost immediately in that, like, for that person, it could be a new segment that you hadn't thought about, right? You've got a segment that might even be coming to you that you're ignoring, that is just kind of growth that is trying to break down your locked digital door. So that misperception, very common. So some of the data points I think kind of counter that and are surprising to people when I talk to them is 1 in 4 people in the US have a disability that they've self-identified. It's probably a little higher because that's self-identified disabilities. Across the world, it's closer to about 20%. So, 1 in 4, 1 in 5, depending on where you're at, have a disability of some sort. Estimates are that in the US, people with disabilities have about $500 billion in spending power. So, not a small group of people. That's the other misconception is like, oh, it's really a not like I might have a personal disability come occasionally, but the reality is, especially in a digital world where they don't have to make the effort to go somewhere, the chances of one of those people who has a disability coming to your site are much higher. And the spending power globally of people with disabilities and their friends and family, which I'll get into in a second, is
Mm.
13 trillion. So again,
Whoa.
trillion with a T, not a small number also. The reason that's important, that's one of my favorite stats that I talk about because a person, again, we'll use the example of somebody who's blind. They have trouble finding a clothing site that does really good alt text and really good descriptions of the products so that they can, again, visualize what they're buying to
Mhm.
wear
Mhm.
and that it's accessible so they can get through the checkout flow and they can fill out all the forms. And if there's an error, the error description is clearly written
Mm.
again in the code so that their screen reader can read it and they know, oh, I put my last name in the first name and the first name in the last name, and that's why it's erroring out and the credit card's not working. They can get through that whole process somewhat seamlessly. They're like, hey, friends with disabilities, if you need to buy something, go to this site. This place makes it much easier. Like one of the best experiences I've had. And then they tell their family who don't have disabilities, but they're like, hey, I want to support the sites and the businesses that make it easier for my friend or my loved one to shop. And so we see that over and over that not only do you have a super loyal group of people,
Mhm.
which loyal customer loyalty in today's age is right. Like if you can get a loyal customer, you've done something right, and that really helps your long term business and your growth. But being able to say, hey, not only am I getting loyal uh, customers, but they're talking about me to their friends and family, and they're expanding. They're doing the marketing and the advocacy for me. That's another really big kind of salient point there. But we could also get into SEO, like I said, SEO, GEO if you want, usability. There's just so many additional factors as you start to kind of get into the technical details of building an accessible site.
Amazing. And yeah, when you and I met and we started talking about this, I had a similar experience to the experience you had joining AudioEye. I mean, a little sliver
Yes.
probably what you experienced, but like, whoa, this is, I've been working in digital marketing for the last 12 years. And, I've heard mention of this in design more so, like, oh, be mindful of your, the legibility of your text. You want it to be bold enough and large enough and easy on the eyes and all that. And so, but this idea of like, whoa, I didn't even have on my radar that there could be legal implications, that the implications to revenue could be that great that like it, all these that your organic performance could improve through addressing these things. So, um, can you talk a little bit about how AudioEye then plugs in to those businesses? Like, what does it look like? What does a business need to be prepared to do in order to bring AudioEye into the mix to help them address these risks and opportunities?
Yeah. So what we found is accessibility, the principle of accessibility, once someone hears it, like you were just mentioning, right? We met a couple weeks ago and it's like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. And starting to kind of see as you're browsing sites how it can apply. Um, Companies get that. But then when they start to understand, okay, I've got to understand that there's these things called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG, which is over 80. guidelines and principles that help build a site so it's accessible, and they get very specific. Um, but there's a lot of them, and then transferring that knowledge to developers about what are the nuances, how do you build appropriately, to already overworked and busy development teams who are struggling with other customer experience priorities. Um, Adding accessibility is one of those things that a lot of companies try to start internally, right? And then they quickly realize it just keeps getting deprioritized. And pretty soon it's a 2028 thing to address. But that doesn't help with the scary compliance issue now that we talked about, and it doesn't help with the there's potentially already people coming to my site that I'm not converting, and so like you're leaving growth and loyalty on the table as well. And so what we do, like I mentioned earlier, is we start with technology, automation, where you install some JavaScript on your code, very light, that doesn't have an impact on page load times or anything like that. That can automatically go through every page on your site and identify about 50% of accessibility issues. And with our technology, it will also fix them as the page loads, so that those issues, while they still technically exist in the background for that page that screen reader is reading, or that person is seeing but not hearing, or seeing and having to tab through, they're getting a more accessible experience. With those web content accessibility guidelines, about 50% of them, like I said, are highly contextual. You need a person who's got that technology to go through and experience it and say, okay, this actually is an issue. And those 50% are typically the more severe ones, the ones that will actually keep somebody from, like, I literally can't move past this form because
Mm,
something's broken and I don't
mhm,
know what it is. And I've just got to leave and go to another website and start all my efforts over there and hope that that one works. So those we work with people with disabilities to audit sites, audit templates. We then determine what the fix should be. And then the great part is, instead of just sending like that fix to a development team where again it sits in a backlog and you hope that it gets addressed before the next web update where that fix that was made now becomes irrelevant because it's a new page, right? What we do is we take the code, the fixes, we put them into the automation. And so that same automation that runs and fixes the 50% that it can, now it's got the essentially the personalized code written by people with disabilities for your site. And so you're up to now more like 95% accessibility. And for that other 5%, we work and say, hey, these are things that we shouldn't do at the JavaScript level. We really should do at your level, or there maybe have brand and color implications. So we want the
mhm,
customer to make some of those decisions. So the that combination of technology and human expertise, but the human expertise really being wrapped back into the technology, is really what helps it scale. Because today's internet is, again, so much different than it was 15 years ago, but even 5 years ago, with just the dynamic, the interactive nature of it. There's much more content being created and being pushed. Another interesting fact that there's a accessibility report that happens every year called the Web A Million, and they look at the top million homepages. And 6 years ago, 98% of those web pages were inaccessible. So it's like, all right, let's fast forward 6 years, double the investment in accessibility in that time, many more consultants, many more tools. And we've gone down to 3 percentage points in that 6 years. So it's about 95% of the sites are inaccessible. So at that rate, like, you and I we won't be around for an accessible web. So we really do think that this approach that we're talking about is what scales in the internet of today, and really the internet of tomorrow as well. But it's really just saying to companies, you can have the desire, you can have the kind of the knowledge that this is the right thing to do, that it can help your business. We'll take care of the accessibility, really. We'll take care of the expertise, and we'll use those billions of data points to continue to improve our AI driven automation. But
mhm.
let's let your developers focus on the other growth initiatives that you have as well, and the other personalization initiatives. And that's the way that for most companies, we've seen it be something that they can take on, incorporate, and kind of, again, continue with the other things that they've already been working on.
Mike, I so appreciate the education on all of this, and I'm excited to get to talk to you about it and get to share it with our audience. Let's go ahead and wrap up there, listeners. If you want to learn more about Mike and AudioEye, details will be in the show notes. Otherwise, Mike, thank you so much for joining on Data Planet today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.